All right. In this episode of Frank Weber's Party, our fifth episode now, I go over some information about our show, and then I talk a little bit about traffic, especially as it related to my recent vacation. That's the story that I was originally going to tell last week. And then we go into Priscilla's role on License to Kill. It's a lot of information-packed episode that I think you'll find enjoyable and hopefully a little funny, so stay tuned. Hello, and welcome once again to Frank Weber's Party. I'm your host, Frank Weber. So glad that you could be here once again. I want to give a special thanks to all of you who are listening and subscribing and telling your family and your friends about me. I just got listed in all the directories last week, so I wanted to give you a special thanks about that. So the way that we're doing it around here, I'm recording and editing about 2 weeks before the episode drops. So today is June 28th, and this particular episode is not going to drop until July 14th. And we have new episodes every Friday. And I'll tell you, we also have another way to support us. I'm not inclined to charge for the show at this time, and maybe never, possibly with some premium content later on. But we do have a Patreon sort of link where you can donate to the show if you feel so inclined. And we'll give you a shout out for that on a future episode. But of course, that's entirely up to you. And just one other housekeeping thing as well. My personal website is a little bit behind on its construction. It works okay, but some of the links aren't there. So I need to fix that for you. Today on the show, we have what I would say is a veritable shitload of information to talk to you about. I'm going through a number of kind of potpourri housekeeping things. Also going to tell you a little bit about the story I was going to tell from last week, and actually a follow-up to the story I did tell last week. And then we're going to review Priscilla's small-ish but abbreviated role in the James Bond classic License to Kill. So without further ado, I'll go ahead and start talking to you actually about some other things real quick. Just want to let you know I was kind of disappointed in how the show turned out last week, just to be honest. I felt like I was a little off that day, but fortunately I was still able to present the content that I wanted to. And as far as moving the show forward, I am asking really for your feedback if you feel moved to give it on that as well, in the methods that are listed in the show notes. This is also where we are going to do an Ask Me Anything segment, but I can't do the segment if you don't ask me anything. And so I just want to let you know I'm still planning that. And I'm also still wanting to fit some, at least occasional interviews into the show, but I've been asking myself how exactly that's going to work, how I'm going to do that. Doing that is going to obviously increase the length of the show. May be able to do it as a standalone bonus episode, no charge, of course, or possibly as a substitute for this episode every so often. Because right now I'm kind of liking the format as it is, but I think I need to cut down on maybe a lot of the details. There's going to be a ton of it when we get into this James Bond thing here in a second. But when we review these shows that the lovely Priscilla Barnes has been in, we'll probably cut down on a lot of the plot and story details, even a little bit less information on the actors. Certainly we'll tell you who's in it, and try to put a little bit more comedic moments into play. And let's go ahead and get into last week's story, part of our trip to Naples, as you may recall me telling you, my wife likes to go to the casino. She just plays slots. She doesn't play anything else. She doesn't play the tables or anything. And she typically goes when I play golf. That's what she does. She tries to go and play the casino. And I was telling this to a friend of mine at the country club where I play golf. And she thought this would be a terrific story, a funny story that I should tell. So we used to go to Vegas many times. We've been there very many times. We used to live more proximity to that area. Haven't been in a few years and really need to go back sometime. But a lot of times she would go to the slots, and sometimes if her sister was in town with her, they would spend all night playing the slots. And as a joke, I would get this brochure that they only have in Las Vegas and maybe all of Nevada casinos. There's a brochure available called When the Fun Stops, and it has a picture of a sunset on it. And I would go and hand this to her as a joke, and it's, if you think you have a gambling problem, call this number. And my wife would get super mad at me. And I think I tried that more than once, and it doesn't work anymore. I don't think she thought it was funny, but I hope that you think it's funny. So I felt inclined to tell you that today. And then I'm going to tell a kind of a related story based on our trip from Naples last week. So we drove down there and back. We did that last year. We did it again this year. I'd kind of like to fly again next time, but then there's problems with flying now. Naples is actually difficult to get to by commercial flight because you have to fly into Fort Myers, and that's another, I want to say 30 or 40 miles, but I'm not sure if it's even that long. But driving from Canyon, Texas to Naples, Florida, it's about 1,600 miles down there, 1,600 miles back. You're looking at 2 days traveling down there, 2 days traveling back. We had 4 days to spend there. You really don't have a lot of time to stop and see a lot of things on the way, which is unfortunate. Our route included Vicksburg, Mississippi, which is the site of a famous Civil War battle, but I never get to stop there because it's a lot of driving, very tiring. I feel kind of glassy-eyed at the end of each day and when we finally get there. And when you're driving that much, you observe a lot of things. You observe a lot of the behaviors of other drivers. And so this is kind of another social commentary related to people's driving habits today. It's also related to having a lot more cars on the road in a lot of locations, depending on where you are, what time of day it is. I've been driving for about 30 years, and some people would say that I'm 30 years actually this summer is when I was in driver's ed class. Some people would say that I'm slow or I'm cautious. I don't really want a ticket. People a lot of times will compare me to the way that my late father drove. He passed away about 9 years ago. God rest his soul. And I can tell you a little bit about that time. Maybe he was a slow and cautious driver, but there were other things, other factors that were involved in that I'll go over with you briefly. The first vehicle that he had that my brother and I came to know was a 1979 Chevy Love, which is basically an Isuzu pickup, small pickup with a Chevrolet name on it. It doesn't have a real powerful engine. And he drove that around for a good, 11, 12 years till about the early 90s. You also have to remember that there was a 55-mile-an-hour national speed limit, which means that any public road, whether it's a highway somewhere or backcountry road, farm-to-market road or whatever, the highest posted speed that you could go anywhere in this country was 55 miles an hour. Now, you youngins are going to think that's absolutely crazy. How in the world did we ever survive? But it was still 55 during the first couple of years that I was driving. Probably slower speed is a safer speed, but I know it's kind of unfathomable back then. You also realize that there was no internet, there was no social media, or anything until about the mid-90s. So there was really no instant gratification or hurry-up mentality. This isn't related to driving, but when you ordered something in the mail back then, Time Life had your favorite country music on some 8-tracks or something like that. You would have to either order it by mail with check or money order, or call in with your credit card, maybe even pay cash on delivery, which was really going out of style even in the 80s. And you still had to wait 4 to 6 weeks or 6 to 8 weeks for it because there was no Amazon Prime. You basically had to wait for it if there was nothing like that in the store. And I think what was also happening back then is that there was a less perception of narcissism or a general better courtesy amongst other drivers. Okay, so that's my take on him. And my observation was that a lot of things seem to have changed with driving habits. I have a long, long list of pet peeves while driving. Obviously, it would be too long to mention anything here. We don't have that much time. But one of the things that I saw, there were people who would try to pass me in the left lane. I was driving my little Toyota Camry. It's got a 4-cylinder engine. I didn't have my big Dodge Ram Hemi, which is 8-cylinder and much more powerful, better acceleration. But I was in my little car, and you have people on a 2-lane road. They would try to pass me on the left lane. They weren't passing. That causes a lot of problems for other people who choose to pass. And that may actually be the cause of a lot of road rage. And then you have the people who are in such a hurry. They tailgate you. They weave in and out of lanes. I almost feel, especially in my little Camry now, if I'm on a 3-lane freeway, that I can't hang out in the middle lane or even in the slow lane, where obviously a lot of people are still getting on the highway, because they've made it dangerous to be in all 3 lanes. I'll see things on city streets as well. Sometimes you'll see rude drivers, people honking at you even though you can't go. I've seen something here around Canyon where I'm driving along a road and I'll see somebody, looks like they're going full speed, maybe even a little over the 30-mile-an-hour speed limit to a stop sign. And obviously they're messing up their brakes and scaring me because are they going to stop? And then yesterday I was even driving around town here in Canyon and coming out of a stop, and the light turns green, and then the car behind me just decides, well, I'm going to go around anyway because the acceleration is slower, which it is on my car. I don't really get what's going on a lot of times on these traffic fronts that I see. My understanding is a lot of people's insurance premiums have gone up here in the last few months, even if they weren't in an accident, because the number of accidents in the general area has gone up high enough to increase everybody's premiums. And so I just want to give another little call to action here, just to ask people to slow down, care for themselves as well as others. I wanted to even put the old Heinz ketchup thing here. The slogan was, good things come to those who wait. The point of the matter is, let's all stay alive. I can be alive so I can keep making this podcast for you, keep writing a book for you, which I'm still working on. But then not only keep myself alive, but keep yourself alive so that you can listen to this podcast and tell everybody about it and hit subscribe. That's the point of my message there. I don't really get what's going on. I told myself the other day, 45, I'm more experienced. In some ways, I may be more wise, but I see a lot of things I less and less understand. And I got some people out there who are around my age or middle-aged, I'd love to hear from you. I'd love to hear your stories, and we can interact on that. Anyway, I think that's it for the first part of the show. Let me take a quick break, and then we'll get into License to Kill. All right, so welcome back. We're going to do a review of the James Bond movie. I guess some people would say classic License to Kill, where Priscilla plays Della Churchill Leiter. She was the fiancée and then briefly the wife of CIA agent and Bond friend Felix Leiter in this movie. It was released in the United States July 14th, 1989. And if you listen to last week's episode, you'll also recall that later that night, Priscilla was in the Highway to Heaven episode. And it's by purpose that we coincidentally put all those together right around the same time. I'm going to spend hopefully considerably less time on the plot and the stories and telling you too much about the actors. I used to think as a kid that the plots in a lot of these movies were quite complex. This one really is not. You can summarize it in 2 or 3 sentences, really. So I'll give you an overview, and I will tell you about some of the actors that are in here as well. And we'll talk a little bit about Priscilla's role, which confused me for a long time. I was heartbroken what happened to her in this show, and I didn't really understand it for a long time, but now I do, and I understand it better. And this is going to maybe take a little time because I have a lot of stories regarding the Bond franchise and this movie in particular. Give you a brief history of the franchise. So there was a guy named Ian Fleming who wrote Bond novels in the 1950s. And then there was a movie production team called Eon, E-O-N, that was run by the Broccoli family, Albert originally, and now I think it's being run by Barbara. They and United Artists teamed up to make them into movies, first releasing Dr. No in 1962. They have made to date 25 films. License to Kill was the 16th. And then you have 2 non-canon films. The original Casino Royale in 1967 was a comedic spoof with David Niven. I believe Peter Sellers was in that as well, and so was the first Bond girl, Ursula Andress. And there was also a movie called Never Say Never Again in 1983 that was basically a Thunderball remake using the exact same Bond as in Thunderball, Sean Connery. And several actors have played him over the years. You have Sean Connery. And then there was George Lazenby for one movie, Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton here, Pierce Brosnan, Daniel Craig. My brother and I, we always talk about these movies and how they have sort of transformed over the years. We're not real big fans of Daniel Craig and some of the direction that the franchise has gone since then. So we've kind of lost interest after the Pierce Brosnan movies. And the appeal about James Bond is kind of one of the quotes from the first Austin Powers movies. You know, every young man, and maybe older man, perhaps my age or older, wants to be Bond, and the women want to be with him. He has a cool, perhaps debonair demeanor. He dresses well, stylish. He has a wit and charm and a charisma. Just kind of a cool cat. He's got all the cars and the gadgets. He appeals to us. He seems to, in a lot of ways, have a certain amount of wealth or success, even though he works for the English government and Her Majesty the Queen, Queen Elizabeth II during these. He always gets the bad guy at the end, always gets the girl. It's an idyllic life and probably a little too ideal in this world of ours, but that's why it's so much fun. I think Sean Connery, the original, was the best, with Pierce Brosnan being a close second. They seem to have the best balance of toughness and grit and humor. But because I'm a big fan of comedy and humor, I also really love Roger Moore for his humor, even if it seemed a little too goofy or excessive at times. And being iconic, it's good to make fun of. And it's been around for so long, it's been so popular, why not? One of the best examples of that, of course, was Austin Powers. He made 3 of those movies so far. I don't know if Mike Myers is interested in doing any more. We have some other examples as well. Roger Moore did a great spoof of himself in the original Cannonball Run. And obviously I would check out any and all of those movies that you can, because they're quite entertaining and quite good. And the crazy thing is that the Eon producers, the Broccolis and maybe some others, they seem to get very frustrated or annoyed when people would spoof their films, even though that helps to promote them. It helps to lead people to them. Or if you've already seen them, you think it's funny, and it's all good promotion. So I never really understood what their attitude was on that. These movies, they write themselves, they're for comedy, essentially. And I saw a couple of YouTube sites. One that I would check out is there was a guy, I believe his name or the name of the group is called Cinema Sins, like S-I-N-S, like sins from the Bible. And he had a thing called Everything That's Wrong with License to Kill in Less Than 23 Minutes. Very funny. And if you watch that, you get the feeling that the producers or the writers were really not paying too much attention to what was going on, because there's a lot of plot holes, and maybe they missed out on a lot of details. And with all the things that he listed, there was like over 100 sins that he counted. And he almost makes you wonder if it was really well done or not. So anyway, License to Kill, go ahead and start reviewing the show here. So it was the 16th Bond movie. Timothy Dalton in his final Bond movie, and we'll get to that in a little bit. He was very tough and gritty. He was rumored to read the Ian Fleming novels while he was on the set and be very by the book. He was not real great at the comedy and the comic relief. I remember an interview where Priscilla was talking about it a little bit. She's a very funny person, was on a very funny show and other shows for that matter. And he apparently asked her how he could become funnier. So back in 1989, I was 11 years old. I watched this movie in the theaters twice. Now, I don't really know why. Again, I'll tell you, it's not one of my favorite movies, not one of my favorite Bond movies. First time was with my older late half-brother Rick, and the second time was with my dad and my brother. And both times in the theaters, when Priscilla appeared on screen early in the show, people said, "Oh, hey, that's Terry. That's Terry." And because they still remembered her from Three's Company, it's been less than 5 years at the time since the show had been off. She looked stunningly beautiful in that wedding dress. I still, throughout the years, think about that time. I don't know if I really appreciated her beauty until this movie. So we'll go over some of the plot overview here and some of the actors, and then tell you about a lot of the trivia here. So basically, Bond is in the Florida Keys. I don't really know what time of year it is, or if that really matters. It's kind of important for a particular scene that's early in the movie. But anyway, his buddy, Felix Leiter, CIA agent, is getting married to Priscilla Barnes' character, Della. And for some reason, he is working on the day of his wedding, and he's following this drug lord. And they go out and basically capture the drug lord, send him to jail. Great beginning of a Bond movie, I suppose. But then there's another CIA agent who's corrupt, takes a bribe, and then Sanchez is the drug lord's name. He gets out of jail, and so do his henchmen. And then Felix and Della, they get married. James Bond's the best man. I believe Frank McRae is in the movie as well. He was in some memorable movies, some funny things. And so the bad guys, they get out of jail, and basically they ambush Felix and Della. Della is murdered. Some people say raped because she's lying on a bed. There's a lot of controversy over that. We'll get into that. And then Felix is left near death, maimed by a great white shark, because everybody still loved great white sharks, even though the Jaws franchise had ended a couple of years before. But anyway, James Bond is very upset about this. He was married 20 years before on Her Majesty's Secret Service, where Telly Savalas played Blofeld, the bad guy. And he was married to somebody named Tracy, and she was killed at the end of that movie. And so he knows what it's like to be married very briefly to somebody and have them die. And he goes into sort of a vengeful rage, and he wants to go and get these guys. And his boss, M, who was still played by Robert Brown at this time, says, no, we can't do that. This is not any of our business. This is United States CIA and DEA stuff. And so he refuses an assignment like in Turkey or something. And M says, no, you can't stay here in the States and do this. And he says, your license has been revoked. Give me your license and your gun and everything. And he becomes a rogue agent. And so over the course of the movie, he follows these guys. Some of the other filming in this movie happened in Mexico, although it probably was supposed to be set in Panama. They talk about something about a country called Isthmus or something. And so there's a back and forth, and we see all sorts of things, lots of seafaring boats and underwater battles and decompression chambers, scenes at the end with 18-wheel tankers and everything. As you can expect, Bond tracks these guys down, takes care of them. There's actually 2 Bond girls, officially romantic interests in the movie. And that, as they say, is that. Let me go ahead and get into some of the other actors real quick. Of course, you had Timothy Dalton playing Bond. He mostly was a movie star, or still is. He's still around. Mostly a movie star. I don't remember him on TV very much. I think he did some stage roles. They say he was asked as early as 1968 to play Bond, which meant he would have maybe been on that movie on Her Majesty's Secret Service instead of George Lazenby. But he was very young then and actually turned it down. And of course, we also got Roger Moore, which I think was still a great thing for the series. And then we have Robert Davi, who was in it. An excellent actor, really good guy in real life, if you ever heard him talk. But he's been in some blockbuster movies, was in some TV for a lot of years. Movies like The Goonies and Die Hard. I think he was in Showgirls later, which turned out not to be a great movie. Interestingly enough, the year or so before that, he was in a movie with Priscilla, a comedy movie called Tracks, which also had Shadoe Stevens, and wish I could find it. For some reason, that's one of those forgotten movies I hope that I can find someday. You have, like I said, Frank McRae, who was in a lot of stuff like Used Cars, and I think he was in like Loaded Weapon 1, yelled a lot, played another CIA agent, was a good guy, got sacrificed as well in this movie. You had David Hedison, who was in a few movies, a lot of TV. I looked at his bio. He was in The Love Boat 7 times. Now, I don't think that's the record, but that was pretty impressive. He was in Fantasy Island 6 times. Again, very impressive. I think he was in, I saw Charlie's Angels 3 times, was in some Fall Guys a few times with Lee Majors. Kind of ended his career early 2000s, like on The Young and the Restless and daytime soap operas. So he was in a lot of those episodes. Now, David Hedison and Frank McRae, they're no longer with us. David Hedison was the only actor to portray Felix Leiter in 2 different Bond movies. The first one was in 1973's Live and Let Die. There was a bunch of different actors that portrayed that character, interestingly enough. And Frank McRae's character in this movie, he was also a good CIA agent and a friend of Bond's. His name was Sharky. Like, we had all the great white sharks in this movie, so just wanted to add that in there. Should also note that Wayne Newton has a little appearance in this movie. That's Mr. Las Vegas, been playing Vegas and touring for a lot of years. A famous song, Donka Shane. He played a televangelist that Sanchez was using to launder money in the show. But it was always fun to see him in this. And then the 2 Bond girls that Bond was romantically involved, one of them was Carrie Lowell, and the other was Talisa Soto. I haven't really heard a ton of things that they've been in since then, or even before then, although I think I saw Carrie Lowell had been in Law and Order on NBC. And I should also note Benicio del Toro, he played Dario. That was Sanchez's henchman. He was very young in this movie. He only had one previous acting role, which was the year before in that almighty classic Big Top Pee-wee, starring Pee Wee Herman. I'll talk a little bit about Priscilla's role. New bride of Felix Leiter, so her name was Della Churchill Leiter. Gorgeous wedding dress. I think it was a real fancy, expensive thing. Basically a sacrificial lamb in this, and I didn't always understand why they kill her and why she couldn't have maybe been in the role of Carrie Lowell, for instance, who played a spy in this movie as well. And the murder and the possible rape, I don't know exactly. I think I know why people say that. But that and Leiter getting maimed is the main motivation for Bond to go after these guys. She had a few lines right outside the church and inside the church and at their home in the Florida Keys for a little bit. She kissed Bond, wanted to kiss the best man, threw him the garter. And then later on, he's the one who finds her dead on the Leiter marriage bed, essentially. And she's been shot in the chest, probably just once. It looks pretty clean as far as the murder. I don't know about any kind of rape. It may have been implied just because she was on the bed, but it was whatever happened to her was relatively clean. There's also a YouTube video. I didn't notice this at all, but when Bond finds her on the bed, so her eyes are open, okay? And they're supposed to be open throughout the scene, but there's another camera angle that goes from the top of her head, the second camera angle. And if you look very closely, you'll notice that her eyelids close at one point. You have to look really closely or you'll miss it. You yourself can't blink. But she did blink during that scene. I wish that she had a bigger role in the movie, but it was a Bond movie, and that's a great resume builder, and I'm glad that she was in it. Probably one of the most famous movies that she's been in, although she's been in many others that we're going to review. So let me go over a few scenes, maybe a few plot points. At the very beginning of this movie, when they go after Sanchez before the wedding, and they wind up going in I think it was a Coast Guard helicopter, and they tie the back of his prop plane, and it winds up going on its nose or something like that. I don't know. It was really weird. But Bond and Leiter and Frank McRae's character, they're all wearing their tuxedos like they're going to a wedding. And it just seems very weird to me. This is South Florida, lots of clothes on, could be very warm and humid. And they wind up getting back to the wedding. The helicopter takes them back to the wedding. And I don't see how their clothes are all soiled, maybe a little dirty, maybe a little smelly. And a bride-to-be with her wedding coming up is probably going to be really pissed that they went ahead and worked to have these soiled clothes and smell and stuff to them. But obviously they show up at the wedding, and of course, being movies, they don't have any problem with their clothes. So that's one of the weird points. The great white shark is used, of course, to attack Leiter, and I believe Bond feeds a rogue CIA agent, the one that was bribed to get Sanchez out of jail. Great white shark stuff at this point was getting pretty trite. Like I said, the Jaws franchise ended about 2 years earlier. Usually great whites, they probably won't eat you whole, but they probably will attack you. And then I think what was also a problem with this movie is that it's about drugs and drug lords and drug manufacture, and we had a lot of movies about that at the time. And so that was getting to be a little old there. Sanchez had a pet iguana who had a diamond necklace. So if there's a little bit of decadence right there, that would be it. But apparently his old mistress, Lupe, I think her name was, apparently kept the iguana at the end. Of course, we have a requisite undersea battle with harpoons and everything, people shooting harpoons at each other. I believe we had seen that before in Bond movies. We saw one of Sanchez's helpers get put into a decompression chamber and his head blow up, which was kind of comedic now. At the time, it was very weird and grotesque. But remember, This is 1989 or even 88. There's no CGI at the time. People had to make models. They had to make prosthetics. They had to do their own stunts without having to worry about computers. And then, of course, at the end, you had an 18-wheel tanker truck is able to do a wheelie on its side. And then there's another cab of the tanker truck that does a, not sure what they call it, but you basically got the front wheels off the ground. All of that was really done by stuntmen and maybe even by Timothy Dalton himself. He did his own stunts in this movie. I also need to add that the reason that these trucks did these wheelies was so that they could avoid Stinger missiles. Now, I don't really know what a drug lord wants with Stinger missiles, but it is a Bond movie and there needs to be a lot of action and explosions, so that's the reason they did these. Let's go ahead and talk about the review or synopsis of this movie here. Back then, as now, I'm not a real big fan of this particular movie. Reviews over the years have been very mixed. People have been fairly divisive about it or divisive. But a lot of it depends on your taste. There's a lot of different tastes in the actors who played Bond over the years. There's a lot of different tastes in these movies. I've had people tell me, oh yeah, I like how there was more emphasis on the story and less emphasis on the gadgets. And then I was like, well, I like the gadgets, and I like the humor too. And so I would say that the majority of people who have reviewed this, critics and fans alike over the years, the majority of the reviews are positive. Maybe 60-40, maybe 70-30. There were three things that were really different to me in this Bond movie compared to the ones that came before it. But some people also say that none of them after this are really quite as violent. This was a very violent movie, kind of bloody and gory. Bond is out for revenge. It's like the movie Death Wish with Charles Bronson and the sequels with that. There had been concerns, of course, throughout the 80s about violence in movies and television on the increase. And once the 80s left, the discussions ended. And then this series, in fact, earlier in the 80s had some concerns about violence. A couple of the Roger Moore movies, he felt like there were some scenes in it that were not very Bond-like. I had a feeling that there was a certain creepiness as well to this movie, like you would see in a horror movie, the dark nature of it, kind of like Norman Bates or Jason with a hockey mask or Freddy Krueger was going to come out from behind the corner and start stabbing a bunch of people. It had a very non-Bond feel to it. I think what really kind of got me a lot of times too, the way the movie was set up. You basically had the bad guy and his crew captured. I believe they were all captured at the beginning of the movie and they were put into jail. And then they had a wedding and they had a big celebration. And the thought is, what else can you do? This is a 15-minute movie. Everything should be fine. What the fuck are we doing this other 2 hours? All hell breaks loose and the guy gets out. And then we got to solve the problem again. Of course, everybody knows what's going to happen because it was a typical James Bond ending anyway. Those were the three things that really have led me to not like it as much as some other entries. And again, your taste may be different. You might think it's better the way it was or ahead of its time, but it was never really one of my favorites. I give the movie a C+. I think it's fair. It's not bad. It's just not to my liking. And then Priscilla, I'll probably give her a B-. I really wish she was in more of the movie than she was, maybe had a bigger role. I sometimes think if that was really the last old guard Bond movie or not, it had already kind of been transitioning. Maybe it started with Timothy Dalton, and in the next movie, which would be a few years later, Robert Brown retired as M, and then you had Judi Dench take over as M, who is, of course, Bond's boss. I don't know if I really liked her in that role. I jokingly called her Judy Stench instead of Judi Dench, but she had a real big career in a lot of British sitcoms. And then eventually Daniel Craig took over. My brother and I were never a big fan on him. He just didn't do a lot of the things that we expected from Bond. And then the movies are obviously much faster paced, hard to follow now. My brother even told me that Bond died in the last one, even though they're looking for a new Bond actor. That's my thing about change in general. Change can be good. If you've got a problem or an issue in your life or your business or whatever's going on, you need to make a good change. Or if you want to update things to be a little bit more modern, I don't really have a problem with that, but you can't really change the basic formula of a lot of things, whether it's a fiction story or kind of the essence of who we are as human beings. You really can't change that too much without some negative repercussions. The last thing I wanted to get into, this was Timothy Dalton's second and final movie as Bond. He was supposed to make a third that they were going to start working on in 1990. Eon Productions got into a lawsuit with MGM, who had recently acquired the United Artists, and they wound up not making another movie or releasing another movie until late 1995. And that's when Pierce Brosnan stepped in. This was the first Bond movie that was rated PG-13, and it was originally going to be R because of all the violence, but cutting out a few scenes, they made it PG-13. Every Bond since then has been PG-13. And then this Bond movie made money, including in the United States, but it failed to meet expectations. A lot of people feel the advertising for the show was not good. It was going to be called License Revoked until shortly before the movie was released. And that sounded like someone getting a driver's license taken away in the U.S., so that wound up being License to Kill. License with the S being a C written in the English version. And there were also a lot of big summer sequels out that year to compete with the movie, and they didn't take as much home as they would have wanted to. And it caused them to shift the release date of the movies to Halloween or later. And it's been that way ever since. And then I told you a little bit about how this might have been the last old guard Bond movie. But like I said, I don't think it's a poor movie. I think it's a fair movie, and certainly it can be worth a look if you're willing to check it out and stomach a little violence and gore. I think that's about it for today's show. I've gone over quite a bit with you. Hope you're having a great time at the party, and I really enjoy doing this for you every week. Every Friday, you have a new episode. And thank you for listening. Thank you for subscribing. Continue to hit subscribe and tell your family and friends, and we will see you again next time. Thank you so much for being here. I hope you love the show, and take care until then. This is Frank Weber signing off. The theme song is called Retro Funk by SoulProdMusic and can be found at pixabay.com.